Muchas gracias, José.
Thank you very much, Jose. Congratulations for this amazing work that you've been doing. And I don't know if you have any question, any doubt that you would like to share with Jose. If it's not the case, we are going to listen to the next speaker. It's also linked to the education world. We are going to listen to Shane Brad from the University of New Hampshire in the US. We are going to listen to the next speech, Bringing GIS to the Masses Using gvSIG, the use of free and open source GIS in community outreach at the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension.
Cuando quieras, Shane.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I will try to make my English less American, so it's a little easier to understand. And if you would like to ask questions in Spanish or talk to me afterwards, that would be fine. The problem is that I don't have all of my GIS knowledge here in Spanish, which makes it tough in front of a large group of people to speak in Spanish, but feel free to ask questions or talk to me outside. So, has anybody ever heard of cooperative extension? No? Cooperative extension exists throughout the entire United States, but in many other countries, the idea of cooperative extension doesn't exist. What cooperative extension is supposed to do is take information, research, teaching, resources from universities known as land-grant universities, and bring it outside of the university to the people in towns. So it's not just the students who attend the university, but anybody who lives in the state should be able to receive training and education. And this is a very different mission than most universities. Most universities have professors that teach an academic class for 3 months or a year, and they start a GIS class talking about projections and coordinates and units. And the whole world is starting to think, why do I care about GIS? Well, when you talk with people in towns, you only have 3 hours or 1 day, and it's very important to think strategically about what it is you're going to tell them, and more importantly, what you do not tell them, so that they do not get scared and run away screaming to say, GIS is bad. In the past, most of the effort of cooperative extension was focused on agriculture. The land-grant university system started in 1860s. Believe it or not, right in the middle of our Civil War is when the system started, and cooperative extension began about 100 years ago. In 2014, it will be the 100-year anniversary of cooperative extension. Now, one of the things that we do and we rely upon tremendously is something called needs assessment and evaluations. So we don't get an idea in our heads about what's important and then go out and tell people what we think. I think a lot of people think that outreach means going abroad outside of the walls of your office and telling people what you know. Part of outreach is also asking people what they need, so that your message and your research can bring them closer to the information that they need to make decisions in their lives. Also, after you do trainings, you need to evaluate. Was my training efficient? Was it effective? Did people learn something? And more importantly, did people do something differently after my workshop because they learned something and then put it into action? So that is a very important part of what cooperative extension does. And also, we are not paid for or represented by any company. In fact, if people ask me, what's your favorite GIS software? I'm not supposed to say, because we are supposed to present information in an objective manner and let people decide for themselves. And as you can see, there's many people that work with community gardens. There's a big component of youth. There's a program called 4-H, where many young people in rural areas learn how to work with animals. And in cooperative extension in New Hampshire, where there's a lot of focus on forestry. New Hampshire has the second most forest out of any state in the United States. 75% of New Hampshire is forested. So there's a lot of emphasis on working with private landowners and public landowners. And so the theme of cooperative extension is there on the bottom, which is to take research-based information from the university, from an objective standpoint, supposedly, and bring it out to business owners, youth, community members outside of the university walls. So in New Hampshire, does anybody know where New Hampshire is? No? In New Hampshire, you can see here marked with a yellow smiley face is where the University of New Hampshire is located. New Hampshire touches the ocean for about 25 kilometers, wedged in between the bigger state on the right, Maine, and the state below us, Massachusetts. So for me, in the United States, we don't think of distance in kilometers or miles. We think in how long it takes us to drive our car from one place to another. So officially, I'm about 1 hour from Boston and about 4.5 hours from New York City, which you can see New York City in the bottom. So the University of New Hampshire is in Durham, but Cooperative Extension has offices throughout the entire state. There's 11 different offices, because if you're going to work with the people, you need to be where the people are, not just at the university. And right now, the GIS GPS training program is housed in the Natural Resources Department, program team, excuse me. They don't know where to put me, because obviously GIS can be used for much of what Cooperative Extension does. Now, the program was started in 1998, our training program. I had nothing to do with the beginning of it, but I've been involved for a long time. And the needs assessment at the time indicated that Esri software was what people wanted to use. It was what they were using. And so the entire program was mounted starting with ArcView 3. And we continue, honestly, to teach Esri software to today. There are many Esri users in the community in New Hampshire. It's one of the things that we do. But keep in mind that Esri does not pay for what we do, and in fact, we are not official representatives of Esri. What we started to do, I guess, in 2000, 2001, was buy laptops so that we could go out to these other offices and teach. So we have 15 laptops that I throw in my car, and I drive around the state like I'm a traveling rock band, and I set up and I teach, which allows us to reach a much greater audience than we would otherwise. And originally, this program was based on natural resource professionals, also teachers, and people who work in towns on planning boards or government officials. And we, in the beginning, when I started and I took over this job officially in 2006, we had 3 or 4 classes. They were focused on traditional handheld GPS, a 2-day class on how to use ArcView, and our 10-day class called Community Mapping, where not only did we teach people how to use the software, but made everybody do a specific project of their own interest so they would learn how to use the software themselves. Now, one bad part about my job is I don't really do a lot of GIS. I make some maps, I do some analysis, but most of my job is looking out at the vast ocean of GIS and trying to make sense out of it, decide what's the best option, and also figure out how can I communicate this effectively to the people of New Hampshire. If they come for 3 hours to a workshop, how do they leave knowing something they can use and not being frightened? And so one of the jobs I hope I do is I act as a translator, because if each individual person in our state had to spend all of their time trying to look at the newest version of gvSIG, the newest version of Google Earth, what is the newest version of GPS? They would never actually do their jobs. That's my job, to look at the technology, try to track the changes, and make it approachable for people in our state. So when I started in a job in 2006, one thing I heard all the time was GIS is too expensive. And that's such a boring and limiting idea, because all conversations stopped once I said how much things cost. That was it. That was the end. And so I thought to myself, well, there has to be another way. There has to be a way where you can do something for free. Some people care about open software, but honestly in New Hampshire, they care about it being free. The state motto of New Hampshire is live free or die. It actually says that on our license plate. So everything is about freedom in New Hampshire. That's the state theme, is freedom. And so I would talk to people, they would say, GIS is great, but we can't afford it, so go away. That's the end of the conversation. So that was one reason to think about what is out there that's free that people could use. Number two, many schools, not all, but many schools use Macintosh computers. I myself am a Mac user. What was available for Mac users in the Esri universe? Not much, right? ArcGIS, ArcExplorer, Java Edition for education, but you couldn't do a lot of real GIS. So the answer was, well, you can install Windows and you can run this with VirtualBox, and most schools said no. So the answer was, if you have a Mac, you cannot do GIS. And to me, that was just not acceptable. Also, many towns, small towns in New Hampshire, and businesses were very concerned about licensing, concerned about not only paying for the software once, but then also continuing to pay over time for maintenance. And because of all of these things, I needed a new way to get people involved with GIS. Because you need to get people started first so they see the power of what GIS can provide, and then maybe they're willing to spend more time or more money. But all of these led me to think and start to look and say, what is out there? We need new ideas. We need new training. So what you can see on the screen is just a few of the software packages that I discovered that would work. And of course, some people use Linux, not as much in the United States and New Hampshire, but there are a lot of Mac users and also Windows users. And so I discovered some of these. Some of these may be new to you. Some of them certainly are not new. But again, I wasn't focused just on open for the time being. I was focused on what is out there for free. And of course, you can't expect people to come for a workshop for 3 days if they don't even know why they should be there in the first place. So that's part of my job too, is to redesign our workshops, make them shorter, so they're 3 hours instead of 3 days to get people started. So over time, what's happened, if you look on the left, is a graph, and the axis, the y-axis running vertically, is the same if you show number of workshops as if you show number of workshop attendees, or the number of people who were there. That over the past 4 years or so, there's been a giant shift in our programming to include more free and open options. And that covers a whole bunch of different workshops, a few of which I will talk about in a moment. Now, we still teach Esri software because we do a needs assessment, and that is what some of the people in our state still want, they still have. And it's not my job to tell them that they are stupid for using Esri software. But we provide what they ask. You can see, though, very clearly that there's been a big shift. And before this, in 2006, there were 0 free and open focused workshops. Now it's been a big shift. You see, more than half of the people that we train are trained in something that is either free or open. And on the right-hand side, although this is not exactly equivalent, I group this idea of free and open into something I call emerging geospatial technologies. On my mind, we have what we've always done, and then we have the new stuff. So this falls into the new stuff. And that's just a map showing for New Hampshire and the neighboring states of Vermont and Maine, all of the places that we've taught workshops over the past 6 years, and the number of workshops that were taught in that location. If you see the little gray lines in New Hampshire, those distinguish the counties. Not quite sure that there's an equivalent political boundary in Spain, but the important part of extension also is to make sure that we reach every county. And you can see by looking at the dots that I've taught workshops over the past years in every single county in the state. So what are the new workshops that gvSIG was part of? Well, number one was something I called GIS on pennies a day. And I don't think that there's a good translation in Spanish for this. But The idea is that there are many books, Europe on $10 a day, or Cooking Healthy on $5 a day. And the idea was, here's GIS with very little money. You don't have to spend a lot in order to learn this. So at first it was a one-day workshop where we just did a very quick overview of some GIS basics, what's out there for free. We tried our local online mapping option at the time, which was developed by our state GIS database. And of course, we talked a little bit about Google Earth. So over those few years, I taught 14 workshops, about 10 people per workshop. So about a little over 100 people at least got exposed to this idea of GIS basics and thinking about what you could do for free. In the beginning of 2010, I split that workshop into 3 different workshops, each of 3 hours, 2 of which are shown here. One was I was going to separate everything down to the most basic workshop that we could teach, and I called it GIS 101. So it would be very clear if people said, where do we start? This is where you start. And it was pretty much the first half of GIS on pennies a day. So it wasn't too hard. You just used the same materials. But the second, I think that's of more interest to the people here, was something called GIS on pennies a day test drive. And the test drive is what you do when you're going to buy a car. You get in the car, you kick the tires, you go for a drive. And that was the idea, that we were going to take some of the best free and open GIS software. I was going to create my own small manuals so that people, after learning some GIS basics, could sit down and test drive each of the software packages to get an idea. And I developed my own materials because I wanted the exact same steps in each software package so that people could compare directly. How do you do this in gvSIG? How do you do this in Map Window? It took me a while to do this workshop because I had to settle on, originally I had 9 different software packages in GIS and pennies a day, and I couldn't mentally deal with 9 different software packages for materials. So I wound up getting down to 4 packages that I was going to use in GIS on pennies a day test drive. And it was AccuGlobe, people may not know of AccuGlobe, Quantum GIS, Map Window, and gvSIG. The funny thing is that gvSIG happens to be in Valencia because I used to live in Valencia many years ago, 18 years ago. I was here for 3 months and then for a year. And when I talked to the gvSIG staff when I was in Spain 4 years ago for our limnology conference, I said, well, where is your office? Let's meet. It turns out that it took me less than 10 minutes to walk from where I used to live in Valencia to the gvSIG office. Of course, I lived here 18 years ago, so I don't think gvSIG office existed 18 years ago. Now, some people in my work say, wow, Shane's going back to Valencia at a conference, but the reality is I'm here because gvSIG is here, and it just happened to be one of the best that I identified. And I also get to explain to people how fun it is living in a country where all of the abbreviations are different. GIS is SIG. The United Nations, OTAN. You're always changing for somebody from the outside, so I have to explain every time I teach, SIG is GIS in Spanish, because people don't know that. Now, after I taught these workshops, I thought you might be interested to hear who is going to these workshops. What are the type of people? Now, I don't have their names up here, obviously, but this was, I just quickly went to the list for 7 of the test drive workshops. I've had 17, so this is not even all of the organizations. But this gives you an idea, and I broke them into 4 categories: education, environmental, private, and municipal. People always ask, well, who's there? The answer is everybody. Everybody is interested in this. You can even see Autodesk. Do people know Autodesk? That is a very expensive, high-end professional CAD program. Even people from that company who worked for Autodesk were interested in hearing about free GIS options. And as I move around and work with people from different states, I'm also exposing people from Maine, from Vermont, from Rhode Island to some of these different concepts. So there's a lot of different types of people that are interested in specifically free and open GIS software. But importantly, after you teach a class, you need to follow up. This is an important part of cooperative extension. And I did this just 2 months ago to ask them, did you learn something after this class? And what you can see is that the red means no, I did not. The light green means I learned a little, and the dark green means I learned a lot. So what you can see in all 3 of those classes, everybody who took those classes learned something. And in fact, in all 3 of those classes, the majority of people said that they learned a lot. So that to me means that we're doing a decent job of communicating new information to people. But even more importantly, did you use what you learned? So a year later, 2 years later, if I ask you, did you do anything? What's the answer? Now, predictably, there are some people who did nothing with the information. But what's more impressive to me is that 80% of the people who took GIS on pennies a day test drive, which is only about free and open GIS software options, 80% of the people did something. What did they do? I don't know, but they actually used what they learned in some way. So to me, that says there are people who are interested, they attend workshops, and they learn something, and then they go away from that workshop and they use it. And of course, gvSIG is a primary component of this. Now, what are the other ways in which I am using open source GIS as part of my job? Because everything we've talked about so far is just workshops that I teach. Well, the first one here on our website, in addition to our workshops, we also put all of our training materials for people to download, to use on their own computers. Because my job is to help people, not to make people come to me. And we also have a small form that allows us to track who is downloading the information. We ask for simple, what's your name, what's your email, just so that we have an idea. And when gvSIG 2.0 is officially released and I update my materials, I can send an email to everybody who downloaded the old version of gvSIG materials to say, hey, the new version is ready. So that's on our website at gisworkshops.org. Another thing is that there is now a site license for Esri software in education throughout our entire state. That means that every single school in New Hampshire can get Esri software for free. I wonder why, right? Esri is now seeing this big competition from things such as gvSIG, and they are trying to get the information out there. I myself has mixed feelings. It's very good that this elevates the idea of GIS. And for some teachers and some people, if that's what they want to use, that's fine. But I always say, well, what about the Mac users? There's still no version for Mac users. So even on our website, which is that newhampshireedgis.org, there is a section for Mac users on the Esri site license website that has a direct download link to gvSIG. Because Mac users still need GIS too. So even when I go to the conference, which I do every year, I go to many different GIS conferences. They have an Educators Day at the Esri conference, our local regional conference, and I always talk about what it is to be a Mac user, and I always talk about gvSIG as one of the only true GIS options that's there. So even at the Esri conference, they have mixed feelings about me. The other one is this something called e-extension, which is an effort of all of the states in cooperative extension to unite to have a single website where we can provide information to people. And there's a group on geospatial technologies that we call Map Assist. So I collaborate with people like me and other GIS users from across the country to try to provide that same content online. And we also have something called Ask an Expert that allows people to submit questions to the system, and then the system delivers questions to people like me who respond to them directly. So it allows the internet to then be brought to people in cooperative extension to foster that interaction. And it's open to anybody who has a professional in that field. So if any of you have interest in participating in this, you're more than welcome, and feel free to talk to me about it afterwards, because it's focused on the US, but it could be everywhere. And then the very last example, and then I'll finish the presentation, is something called the Lake Basin Action Network. Something I've been involved with a little bit. This didn't exist a few years ago. It's starting up now. But I have a friend in Japan who's been doing trainings in developing countries for people on how to use geospatial technologies to manage lakes and watersheds. And we were sick and tired of telling people, we can only use this one software. What are the other options? And gvSIG was identified as one of the options that we should use for this training, because it's spread around the world, it has very powerful software and capabilities, and it also handles raster data, which is important in international settings, because many places have raster data, and even if you have ArcGIS, you still have to have spatial analysts in order to deal with raster data, where gvSIG does it for free. So all of these things, to me, show that open source GIS software, specifically, more so than most, gvSIG, is an important part of my job. It has changed what it is that I do. Will I ever be 100% open source in my job? I don't think I can, because I need to help people see what or do what they would like to do. But as you could see from that graph, it's definitely a shift towards this idea of open and free. And it'll be interesting to see over the next few years, as I continue this, if there are more users from gvSIG coming from our area and through these other applications from across the country in the United States. So the information on the left is my own information for website, Facebook. And then on the right, if you want to know more about UNH Cooperative Extension, the entire organization, that's our main website. Thank you.